The border stretched white and endless, wind screaming along the barbed wire fence like a funeral hymn. Inside the guard station, whispers cut colder than the weather outside. "She got squad leader through connections," someone muttered, quiet enough to pretend no one could hear. The squad leader didn't argue back. She just pulled on her gloves, eyes fixed on the thick curtain of snow where shadows were crawling through the frozen ravine. The radio crackled. Enemy closing in. She gave one silent command, raised her rifle, and took aim. 20 seconds later, 15 intruders dropped in succession like marionettes with cut strings. The entire squad fell silent, and finally understood why she held that position. The outpost sat at the edge of nowhere, a cluster of concrete bunkers and corrugated metal sheds clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a dying ship. Beyond the perimeter fence, the world dissolved into white. Not the gentle white of Christmas cards, but the hostile white of oblivion. Snow didn't fall here. It attacked, horizontal and relentless, driven by winds that could strip skin from bone. Captain Elena Voss stood at the observation window, her breath fogging the reinforced glass. Behind her, the skeletal crew of Outpost 79 went through their routines with the mechanical efficiency of people who knew that one mistake could kill everyone. "Weather report just came in," Sergeant Marcus Reed said, not bothering to hide the concern in his voice. "Storm front moving faster than predicted. We're looking at near zero visibility by 2200 hours. Elena nodded without turning. "Radio status?" "Intermittent. The ionosphere's acting up again. We've got maybe 30-minute windows between blackouts." "Sensor grid?" "Cameras are already icing over. Motion detectors are giving false positives every time the wind shifts." Marcus paused. "We're essentially blind, Captain." She finally turned to face him. Marcus was a veteran of 12 border tours, his face weathered like old leather, eyes permanently narrowed from years of squinting through blizzards. He'd been at 7-9 longer than anyone else. He'd also been the loudest voice questioning her appointment 2 weeks ago. "Then we use what works when technology doesn't," Elena said. "Post guards at intervals of 15 meters along the northern fence. Rotate every 30 minutes to prevent cold injury. No lights, no movement except on signal. And Marcus, tell them to listen more than they look." He studied her for a moment, as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with whatever image he'd constructed in his mind. Then he gave a curt nod and left. Elena returned to the window. The northern approach was a natural kill zone, a long, exposed slope that descended from the mountains into a shallow ravine before rising again to meet the fence line. Any force attempting to breach the border would have to cross that ravine. In daylight, with clear weather, it was a shooting gallery. But tonight would be neither daylight nor clear. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the vibration of wind against the pane. Somewhere out there, beyond the veil of white, she knew they were coming. She'd read the intelligence reports, seen the pattern of probing attacks along the border. 7-9 was isolated, undermanned, and about to be cut off by the storm. It was the perfect target. The mission was simple in theory: hold the line, don't let anyone cross. The reality was infinitely more complex. They had 23 personnel at 7-9, and that included the cook and the medic. Against a coordinated assault, they'd be outnumbered and outgunned. Their only advantages were position, preparation, and, if Elena did her job right, perfect timing. She checked her watch. 6 hours until the storm hit full force. 6 hours to turn a group of skeptical soldiers into a weapon. The outpost had a peculiar feature that made it both valuable and vulnerable: a service gate on the eastern perimeter, installed for supply trucks that came up the mountain road twice a month. Protocol dictated it remain locked and alarmed at all times. But protocol also said someone had to physically check it every 4 hours, which meant exposing whoever drew that duty to the elements and creating a predictable routine. Routines were how people died. Elena walked through the compound, noting everything. The main bunker was solid enough, reinforced concrete with firing slits designed for exactly this scenario. But the barracks were flimsy prefabs, good for sleeping but useless for defense. The armory was well stocked but poorly positioned, too far from the bunker to reach under fire. She found Corporal Jessica Rains in the communications room, hunched over the radio equipment with the focus of a surgeon. Jessica was young, barely 22, but she had a gift for coaxing signals out of atmospheric chaos. "How long can you keep us connected?" Elena asked. Jessica jumped slightly, then recovered. "Honestly, Captain, if this storm is as bad as they're saying, we might lose everything for hours at a time. I can boost the signal, but physics doesn't negotiate," Elena finished. "Do what you can. And Jessica, if we go dark, I need you to maintain a listening watch. Don't transmit unless it's life or death. Sometimes the enemy listens too." "Yes, ma'am." Elena continued her circuit. The perimeter fence was 12 feet of chain link topped with razor wire, anchored in concrete pylons every 20 feet. The snow had already drifted against the base in some places, creating natural ramps. She made a mental note to have those cleared, then reconsidered. Those drifts would slow anyone trying to climb over. Leave them. Private Daniel Ortega was checking the floodlights mounted on the bunker roof. He was the youngest member of the squad, fresh out of training, still carrying the optimism of someone who hadn't yet seen what the border could do to people. "Will we need these, Captain?" he asked, gesturing to the lights. "We'll need to know where they are," Elena replied. "But we won't turn them on." "But if we can't see—" "Light works both ways, Private. It shows us where they are, but it also shows them where we are. And out here, being visible gets you killed." Daniel absorbed this with a slow nod. She could see him filing it away, adding it to the growing list of lessons that no training manual could teach. As she walked back toward the bunker, Elena heard it, a low murmur of voices from behind the generator shed. She recognized the tones, if not the words. The sound of doubt, of questions asked in whispers because they were too dangerous to voice openly. She didn't interrupt. There was no point. Words wouldn't convince them. Only what came next would do that. Inside her quarters, a room barely larger than a closet, Elena opened the locked case beneath her bunk. Her rifle lay inside, meticulously maintained, a precision instrument she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. She'd carried variations of this weapon for 8 years, through 3 different postings, and it had never failed her. She couldn't say the same about the people she'd served with. The wind outside rose to a shriek, and somewhere in the distance something metal crashed against something else. The storm was coming early. Elena checked her rifle one more time, then began the mental checklist that had kept her alive this long. 15 enemies, maybe more. Professional, coordinated, and motivated. They'd use the storm as cover, approach through the ravine, and hit the fence at multiple points simultaneously. Standard tactics. But Elena had spent the last 2 weeks studying this outpost, walking every meter of the perimeter, memorizing every sightline, every blind spot, every quirk of wind and terrain. She knew where the snow drifted deepest. She knew which section of fence sang when the wind hit it just right. She knew where ice formed on the rocks, creating treacherous footing. She knew this battlefield. They didn't. The compound had 17 defensive positions, but only 11 were truly viable in a whiteout. Elena had identified each one during her first week, marking them on a hand-drawn map she kept in her pocket. The key wasn't holding every position, it was holding the right ones, the ones that created overlapping fields of fire, the ones that turned the compound into a maze where every corner could hide death. She'd tried to explain this to Marcus 3 days ago. He'd looked at her map and frowned. Lieutenant Walsh kept people spread across all positions, he'd said. Maximum coverage. Maximum dilution, Elena had corrected. If they hit us from multiple angles, scattered positions mean scattered response. Concentrated positions mean concentrated firepower. And if they slip through, they won't, because we won't be defending the fence. We'll be defending the bunker. Everything else is just real estate. Marcus hadn't looked convinced, but he'd implemented her positioning plan, mostly because orders were orders, not because he believed in them. Now, as Elena strapped on her tactical vest and checked her ammunition count, she wondered if tonight would finally prove her right, or prove Marcus's doubts justified. The intercom crackled. "Captain, Sector Command on the secure line." Elena picked up the handset in her quarters. "Voss here. 7-9, this is Colonel Brennan. I'll be brief. Intelligence has been tracking a 15-man team moving through your sector. They're professionals, former military, well-equipped. We believe they're planning to breach the border and move south into the valley. Your outpost is directly in their path." "Understood, sir. We're ready." There was a pause on the line. "Captain, I've read your file. I know why you were selected for this command despite certain irregularities in the approval process. I also know what you're capable of. But if this situation becomes untenable, I'm authorizing you to fall back to the secondary position and call for extraction." "Sir, if we abandon 7-9, if you abandon 7-9, we lose a building. If I lose 23 people, I lose far more. Use your judgment, Captain. But remember, those people are looking to you to keep them alive. Don't let pride override prudence." "Yes, sir. Good luck, 7-9. Command out." Elena set down the handset and stared at it for a long moment. Colonel Brennan's words echoed in her mind, despite certain irregularities in the approval process. So even the colonel had heard the rumors. Even he thought there was something irregular about her appointment. She laughed once, a short, bitter sound. Then she picked up her rifle and went to face the storm. Elena's appointment to squad leader had been announced on a Tuesday morning, delivered via encrypted transmission with all the ceremony of a weather report. No preamble, no explanation, just new orders and an arrival time. The previous commander, Lieutenant Garrett Walsh, had been medevaced out 3 weeks earlier after a vehicle accident on the mountain road. Fractured pelvis, internal bleeding, shattered femur. He'd survived, but his border career was over. The injuries were too severe for field duty, and Walsh was too proud for a desk assignment. That left 7-9 without leadership at the worst possible time. Intelligence had been tracking increased activity across the border for weeks. The higher-ups had to move fast, and they'd chosen Elena. The problem was how fast they'd moved. Marcus had been at the outpost when the orders came through. He'd read them twice, face darkening with each pass. "Voss," he'd muttered to Corporal Liam Chang, who'd been standing nearby. "Never heard of her." "She came up through the eastern sector," Liam had offered, trying to be helpful. "Word is she's got an impressive record." "Word is," Marcus had repeated, loading those 2 syllables with skepticism. "You know what else I hear? She went through officer training with Colonel Morrison's daughter. They were roommates, shared a barracks for 3 years." The seed was planted. Morrison? Liam had looked uncertain. As in General Morrison, the one who heads the Border Defense Commission? The very same. Coincidence, you think? Or do you think maybe a certain captain happened to have a direct line to one of the most powerful people in the command structure? You don't know that's why. I know her file moved through approval in 48 hours. I know there were at least 6 other qualified candidates at nearby posts who could have been here in the same time frame. I know Walsh and I put in a recommendation that if anything happened to him, I should assume temporary command until a permanent replacement could be properly vetted. Marcus had crushed the orders in his fist, and I know that somehow none of that mattered. By the time Elena arrived, 48 hours later, emerging from a supply truck with her gear bag and rifle case, the story had grown roots. She went through training with Morrison's daughter, probably why her file got flagged. Explains the fast-track promotion. She hasn't put in the time, hasn't earned it. No one said these things to her face. They didn't have to. Elena had been in the military long enough to recognize the signs. The slight hesitation before following orders. The glances exchanged when she walked into a room. The careful politeness that was somehow worse than open hostility. She'd dealt with this before, at her previous posting. There, she'd tried to win them over with competence and patience, methodically proving her worth through actions. It had worked, eventually, but it had taken months. And they didn't have months here. Marcus was the linchpin. Where he went, the others would follow. He'd been passed over for promotion twice, both times watching younger officers leapfrog over him up the chain of command. He'd accumulated 17 years of service, 8 of those at border posts, and he'd never risen above sergeant. Now here was Elena, a captain at 31, taking a position he'd probably thought would, at minimum, be his in an acting capacity. She'd tried to address it directly on her second day. "Sergeant Reed, a moment?" He'd stopped cleaning his rifle, waiting with the patience of someone who'd heard plenty of speeches before. "I know this transition is sudden," Elena had said, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not here to disrupt what works. I need your experience, your knowledge of this outpost, your understanding of these people. I'm asking you to work with me." Marcus had given her a look that was almost pitying. "With respect, Captain, what you're asking is that we trust you when the shooting starts. Trust isn't something you can request. It's something you earn." "Then I'll earn it. We'll see." That conversation had been 2 weeks ago. Since then, Elena had thrown herself into learning the outpost, studying its rhythms, memorizing its people. She'd reviewed every after-action report from the past 2 years. She'd walked the perimeter at dawn, at dusk, and during the darkest hours of night. She'd memorized the names of everyone under her command, their specialties, their strengths, their weaknesses. But every attempt to bridge the gap seemed to widen it instead. When she'd ordered additional maintenance on the sensor grid, Marcus had questioned whether it was worth the manpower. "The system has worked fine for 18 months, Captain. Not sure why we need to fix what isn't broken." When she'd changed the guard rotation to reduce predictability, Liam had pointed out, politely but firmly, that the old system had been designed by Lieutenant Walsh after careful consideration, and changing it might introduce more problems than it solved. When she'd suggested conducting night drills to prepare for exactly the kind of scenario they were now facing, half the squad had suddenly remembered urgent tasks elsewhere. The drill had proceeded with 11 people instead of 23, which made it largely worthless. The worst moment had come 5 days ago. She'd been reviewing the supply inventory in the storage room, checking ammunition counts and medical supplies, when she'd heard voices in the adjacent room. The walls were thin, the words clear. "It's textbook favoritism," someone was saying. She recognized Marcus's voice immediately. They needed someone fast, and she happened to know the right people. Doesn't matter if she's qualified. Doesn't matter if there were better candidates. She had connections. "You really think Colonel Morrison pulled strings?" That was Liam, sounding uncertain. I think the timeline speaks for itself. Walsh gets injured on a Monday. By Wednesday, we have a new CO none of us have ever heard of, approved by the highest levels. That doesn't happen through normal channels, Liam. That happens when someone makes a phone call. But her record is solid. I'm not saying she's incompetent. I'm saying she's untested where it counts. Big difference between performing well in a controlled environment and keeping your head when people are dying around you. A pause. Garrett was a bastard sometimes, but he'd been through hell and back. We knew he could handle the worst this place could throw at us. Her? She's got a clean uniform and a file that moved up the chain suspiciously fast. So what do? A new voice, Private Sarah Mitchell. We do our jobs, we follow orders because that's what soldiers do. But if things go sideways, if she freezes or makes a bad call, we protect our own first. We don't let blind loyalty to the chain of command get us killed. Clear? Clear. Elena had stood frozen in the storage room, pen hovering over her clipboard. She'd wanted to storm in, to defend herself, to lay out her actual record. The citations for valor that weren't in the summary file, the 3 times she'd pulled wounded soldiers out of kill zones, the classified operation in the eastern sector that had earned her the attention that led to this post. But she'd done none of those things. Because Marcus was right about one thing. Words wouldn't matter when the shooting started. Only results would. And there was something else, something he'd said that cut deeper than the accusation of favoritism. She's untested where it counts. That part was true. Elena had never commanded a unit under sustained combat. She'd been in firefights, yes. She'd led small teams on patrol. She'd made life and death decisions. But she'd never been the decision maker, the one person everyone looked to when chaos descended and seconds mattered. She'd never been the captain, the squad leader, the bearer of ultimate responsibility. Until now. Now, as she made her final preparations for the coming storm, Elena could feel the weight of their doubt like a physical presence. Every order she gave was met with that half-second delay, that tiny hesitation that signaled they were mentally checking her logic before complying. In a normal situation, that might not matter. But tonight wouldn't be normal. Tonight would require perfect synchronization, instant response, absolute trust. She had none of those things. What she did have was a plan that would either vindicate her appointment or confirm every suspicion they'd harbored. Private Sarah Mitchell approached, young and nervous. Captain, Sergeant Reed wants to know if you are committed to keeping the Eastern Gate Protocol unchanged. He's concerned that... Tell the sergeant that I am, Elena cut her off, not unkindly. And tell him I need him at the observation post in 10 minutes. We need to discuss final defensive positions. Sarah nodded and hurried off. Elena permitted herself a single moment of frustration, clenching her fists until her fingernails bit into her palms. Then she released it, exhaled, and focused. The truth about her appointment, the real truth, was more complicated than anyone at 7-9 knew. She had gone through officer training with Catherine Morrison, the general's daughter. They had been roommates. They'd become friends. But that friendship had ended 4 years ago during a training exercise that had gone catastrophically wrong. Catherine had made a command decision that put 3 people in the hospital. Elena had filed an honest report about what happened, and that report had derailed Catherine's career. She'd left the military 6 months later. General Morrison had never forgiven Elena for that report. If anything, he'd actively worked against her advancement, blocking 2 promotions and having her transferred to increasingly remote postings. So when the order came to take command of 7-9, Elena had been genuinely surprised. Pleasantly surprised, yes, but also suspicious. Why would Morrison suddenly approve her for a command position? The answer had come in a private message from Colonel Brennan. Morrison didn't approve you, he fought it, but you were the best candidate available on short notice, and the commission overruled him. So the favoritism everyone whispered about was exactly backward. She hadn't gotten this post because of connections. She'd gotten it despite them. But she couldn't tell anyone that. The details of the Morrison situation were classified, tied up in the investigation that had ended Catherine's career. All Elena could do was her job and hope that would be enough. Tonight would answer that question, one way or another. The first crack in unit cohesion came at 1800 hours during the guard rotation change. Corporal Jessica Raines was supposed to be relieved at the northern post by Private Daniel Ortega. Standard handoff. Arrive 5 minutes early, brief on any observations, exchange positions, and the off-going guard returns to the bunker to warm up. Simple, routine, critical. Daniel arrived 12 minutes late. Jessica stood at her post, exposed to the wind, temperature dropping by the minute. The cold was beginning to work its way through her insulated gear, and her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves. She keyed her radio twice, the signal for, "Where the hell are you?" but got no response. When Daniel finally appeared, jogging through the snow, Jessica's face was pale with cold and dark with anger. "What happened?" she demanded, her breath coming out in white bursts. "Sorry, the sergeant needed me to check something in the armory, and it took longer than—" "The armory?" Jessica's voice cut through the wind. "You left me standing out here freezing because of inventory?" "It wasn't inventory, it was— Look, I'm here now, okay? Let's just do the handoff." Jessica stared at him for a long moment, then stalked past without completing the standard briefing. She went straight to the bunker where Elena was reviewing topographic maps with Liam. "Captain, we have a problem." Elena looked up, immediately noting Jessica's condition, the slight tremor in her hands, the pale patches on her cheeks that suggested the beginning of frostbite. "Sit by the heater. What happened?" Jessica explained, her voice shaking from cold and anger. "If I'd been hypothermic, if my reaction time was compromised because someone decided armory inventory was more important than the guard rotation, if the enemy had hit us during those 12 minutes... Who gave Private Ortega the tasking that delayed him?" "He said Sergeant Reed." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. She excused herself and found Marcus in the communications room, ostensibly checking equipment. "Sergeant, did you task Private Ortega with an armory check between 1750 and 1815? Marcus glanced up from the radio panel. "We needed an inventory count before the storm hits. Wanted to make sure we have enough ammunition distributed to the defensive positions." "That inventory couldn't wait 30 minutes until after the guard change?" "It's a 5-minute job, Captain. I figured he'd be done in time." Marcus's tone was matter-of-fact, showing no concern. "No harm done." "No harm done?" Elena kept her voice level, though fury was building beneath the surface. "Corporal Rains stood exposed an extra 12 minutes in dropping temperatures. That's beyond protocol. That's dangerous, and you know it." Marcus finally set down the equipment he'd been inspecting. His face was carefully neutral. "With respect, Captain, if Corporal Rains can't handle an extra few minutes in the cold, maybe she shouldn't be on border duty. These conditions require toughness." The room went very quiet. Several other personnel were present, 2 privates doing maintenance work, another corporal checking supplies. They all suddenly found their tasks fascinating, heads down, but Elena knew they were listening to every word. "The guard rotation exists for a reason, Sergeant. Cold injury is cumulative. Those extra few minutes can be the difference between full functionality and compromised performance. And compromised performance gets people killed. You know this. Lieutenant Walsh trained you on this." "I understand that, ma'am. I made a judgment call based on operational needs." "A judgment call that undermined established protocol and put a soldier at risk." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The room felt pressurized, like the moment before an explosion. "If there's a problem with the way I'm running this outpost, I need you to tell me directly, Sergeant, but I will not tolerate orders that put people at risk because you're testing my authority." Something flashed in Marcus's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect, or maybe just anger at being called out. "Noted, Captain." "Is it? Because from where I stand, this looks like a pattern. Small deviations from protocol, always with plausible justification, always undermining the command structure just enough to create doubt." Elena's voice was still level, but there was steel underneath now. "We don't have time for this. Enemy forces are hours away, and I need to know my orders will be followed exactly as given, so I'm asking you now directly. Can I count on you?" Marcus held her gaze for a long moment. Around them, the pretense of work had stopped entirely. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see how this confrontation would resolve. "You can count on me to do my job, Captain," Marcus finally said. "That's not what I asked, Sergeant." "It's the answer you're getting." Elena nodded slowly, recognizing that she'd pushed as hard as she could without creating an outright crisis. "Then let me be absolutely clear about what your job entails. You follow my orders precisely. You maintain protocol without deviation. And you do not, under any circumstances, prioritize your personal assessments over established procedures. If you can't do that, I need to know now so I can reorganize the command structure before we're under fire." "I can do my job," Marcus said, each word deliberate. "Then do it." Elena turned and left, but she could feel the temperature of the room behind her, not from the cold outside, but from the resentment she'd just ignited. She'd called him out in front of others. Necessary, absolutely necessary, but costly. The damage rippled outward faster than she'd expected. By 1900 hours, word of the confrontation had spread through the entire outpost. The story grew in the telling, as stories always do. Elena had humiliated Marcus. She'd threatened to remove him from his position. She'd said he was incompetent. None of these things were true, but truth mattered less than narrative. Private Daniel Ortega, feeling guilty about his role in triggering the incident, had become defensive. When Jessica tried to brief him on the northern post's blind spots during the next rotation, he'd snapped at her. "I know how to do my job, Corporal. Maybe if you weren't running to the captain every time something doesn't go perfectly." "Doesn't go perfectly?" Jessica's voice rose. "You left me in the cold for 12 extra minutes. And you're still fine. You're making a big deal out of nothing." "It's not nothing when the enemy could have hit us during that time." "Oh, please. The enemy isn't even here yet. Maybe won't be here at all. Maybe this whole thing is just the new captain trying to look important." Jessica had walked away before she said something they'd both regret. But the poison was spreading. Corporal Liam Chang, normally the squad's peacemaker, found himself caught in the middle. He respected Marcus. The sergeant had saved his life during a border incident 2 years ago. But he also saw Elena's point. Protocol existed for a reason. He tried to talk to Marcus privately, found him in the armory recounting ammunition. "Look, I get that you're frustrated," Liam said quietly. "But she's not wrong about the protocol issue. If Daniel had been even later, if Jessica had gotten frostbite—" "She didn't get frostbite," Marcus interrupted. "She's fine. And that's my point, Liam. The captain is so focused on theoretical problems that she's losing sight of practical needs. We needed that inventory. The task was reasonable. The timing wasn't. The timing was fine. She just needs everything done exactly her way, exactly when she says, with no room for judgment from people who've actually been here longer than 2 weeks." "That's not fair. She's trying to prove herself," Marcus said flatly, "and she's doing it by undermining me, questioning my decisions, making me look incompetent in front of the squad. You saw what happened in the communications room. That wasn't about protocol, that was about asserting dominance." Liam didn't have a good answer to that, because from a certain angle Marcus was right. Elena had been harsh. She had challenged him publicly. Whether that was necessary or not depended on whether you believed she was defending critical procedures or just flexing her authority. The second major incident came 2 hours later, and this one couldn't be explained away as a simple misunderstanding. The eastern gate, the one with the service road, had a security light that activated on motion. Standard setup, meant to alert guards if anything approached from that direction. But the sensor was old and temperamental, prone to triggering on wind-blown debris. Protocol dictated that when the alarm sounded, 2 guards would investigate while a third covered from the bunker. Simple, clear, non-negotiable. The covering position was critical. If the investigating team ran into trouble, the person in the bunker was their only backup. At 2000 hours, the alarm went off. Private Sarah Mitchell and Corporal Liam Chang responded immediately, moving toward the gate with weapons ready. But when Sarah glanced back toward the bunker, the covering position was empty. Marcus was supposed to take it. He was in the bunker, he had line of sight, and he was the designated backup according to the watch bill Elena had posted that morning. Sarah keyed her radio. Covering position status? No response. She and Liam exchanged glances, then proceeded more cautiously. They reached the gate, found nothing but wind-blown snow triggering the sensor, and returned. Sarah went directly to Elena, who was in her quarters reviewing intelligence reports. "Captain, we have a protocol violation." Elena set down the reports. "Explain." "Eastern gate alarm, 2000 hours. Liam and I responded as assigned, but there was no covering position. Sergeant Reed was supposed to take it, but he didn't." "Where was he?" "In the bunker, ma'am. He was there. He just didn't take the position." Elena's jaw tightened. This wasn't a timing issue or a judgment call. This was a deliberate deviation from explicit orders. She found Marcus in the common area, deep in conversation with 2 other soldiers. They stopped talking when she entered. "Sergeant Reed, a word, privately." They moved to a side room used for equipment storage. Elena closed the door. "You missed your covering position on the eastern gate response." Marcus leaned against a shelving unit, arms crossed. "False alarm, as usual. That sensor goes off twice a day." "That's not the point, and you know it." "Then what is the point, Captain?" His tone was openly challenging now, the professional veneer finally cracking. "That you want everything done exactly by your book? That you don't trust us to make tactical decisions based on our experience here? The point is that protocol exists because we don't know which alarm is real until someone investigates. The point is that Sarah and Liam were exposed without backup because you decided the procedure didn't apply to you. I could see them the entire time from where I was. If there had been trouble, I would have responded." "That's not the protocol." "Maybe the protocol needs to be reconsidered," Marcus said flatly. "We've been doing this for years before you got here, Captain. We know this outpost. We know when to take threats seriously and when we're chasing shadows." "You know right up until the moment you're wrong," Elena shot back. "And then people die because someone thought they were smarter than the established procedures. Or people die because their commander is more worried about following rules than adapting to reality." They stared at each other, the tension crackling like static electricity. Elena forced herself to take a breath. "You're right that I'm new here. You're right that you have more experience at this specific outpost, but experience doesn't grant you the authority to ignore direct orders. And make no mistake, Sergeant, the watch bill is a direct order. Noted. Is it? Because I'm starting to wonder if you're capable of following my commands, regardless of whether you agree with them. And if you're not, I need to know that now. I can follow orders, Marcus said, each word clipped. Then why aren't you? The question hung in the air. For a moment, Elena thought he might actually answer honestly, might voice whatever was really driving this resistance. Instead, he straightened up and said, "Permission to return to duty, Captain." Granted. He left without saluting, and Elena stood alone in the storage room surrounded by shelves of equipment and supplies, feeling like she'd just lost something important without quite understanding what. By 2100 hours, the atmosphere in the outpost had gone from skeptical to poisonous. The squad had fractured into factions, those who supported Marcus, those who were trying to stay neutral, and a very small group who thought Elena might deserve a chance. Private Daniel Ortega, stung by his earlier mistake and defensive about Jessica's reaction, had started openly questioning whether Elena's strict protocol enforcement was really necessary. "Maybe the sergeant has a point," he said to a group in the barracks. "We've been doing this job successfully for years. Why does everything suddenly need to change?" "Because she needs to prove she belongs here," someone else replied. "She's insecure about her position, so she's overcompensating." Jessica overheard this and nearly confronted them, but Liam stopped her. "Not worth it. Let them talk." "Let them—" Jessica looked at him incredulously. "Liam, they're undermining her before we've even faced a real test. How is that not worth addressing?" "Because anything we say right now will just make it worse," Liam said quietly. "They need to see her perform. Words won't change minds, actions will." But even Liam was struggling. He'd served under Lieutenant Walsh for 3 years, and while Walsh had been demanding and sometimes harsh, there'd been a predictability to him. You knew where you stood. With Elena, everything felt uncertain, every interaction fraught with tension. Sarah Mitchell, who'd reported the protocol violation, now wondered if she'd made things worse. She'd done the right thing, hadn't she? But the looks she was getting from some of the others made her doubt herself. The squad was fragmenting, and everyone could feel it. Trust was eroding, communication was breaking down, and the storm was less than an hour away. Elena stood alone in the observation room, watching the wall of white advance across the mountains. Behind her, she could hear the muted sounds of her command falling apart, hushed conversations that stopped when she approached, orders acknowledged with barely concealed resentment, a unit preparing for battle while simultaneously questioning whether their leader would get them killed. She thought about Colonel Brennan's words, "Those people are looking to you to keep them alive." Right now, those people weren't looking to her for anything except someone to blame when things went wrong. The snow changed character at 22:15 hours. Until then, it had been falling steadily, heavy and dense but manageable. Then the wind shifted, coming down from the peaks with a howl that sounded almost alive, and suddenly the snow was moving horizontally, a white wall that reduced the world to arm's-length visibility. Elena stood at the northern observation post, the one with the best view of the ravine approach. Best was relative now. She could barely see the fence line 30 meters away, but she could hear. The wind had a voice up here, but it was consistent, a low howl that never quite changed pitch. Beneath it, if you knew how to listen, other sounds emerged. The creak of ice forming on metal, the soft rush of snow sliding off the bunker roof, the distant clatter of something loose rattling on the fence. And something else, something that didn't belong. Elena tilted her head, filtering through the layers of sound. There, a rhythmic crunch, barely audible, the sound of boots on snow moving carefully but not carefully enough, multiple sets moving in formation. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "All stations, sound off, minimum voice." One by one, her personnel reported in. All present, all positioned according to her final orders. For once, everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be. Fear was a powerful motivator. She scanned the white void, not looking for shapes. That was useless in these conditions, but for breaks in the pattern. A darkness where darkness shouldn't be. Movement against the wind's direction. Anything that suggested human presence rather than natural chaos. There. For just a second, maybe less, the snow had thinned enough to show a shadow moving along the ridgeline above the ravine. Then the curtain closed again, and it was gone. Elena's heart rate stayed steady, but her mind began calculating. Distance, 800 meters, possibly more, given the distortion from the storm. Speed, hard to tell from a single glimpse, but they were moving deliberately, not hurrying. That meant they didn't think they'd been spotted. Good. She switched her radio to the command frequency. "All stations, this is Voss. We have movement on the northern approach. No acknowledgement. Maintain absolute silence and observe. No one responded. That was the point. Any transmission could be intercepted. Any sound could give away positions. From this moment forward, they operated in complete radio silence unless Elena broke it first. 5 minutes passed. The wind picked up even more, if that was possible. The temperature was dropping fast. Elena could feel it even through her insulated gear. Her breath came out in white plumes that were snatched away by the wind before they could dissipate. Then she smelled it, just a trace, almost lost in the storm's fury but unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time in combat zones. Tobacco smoke. Not from their compound. No one at 7-9 smoked. It was forbidden for exactly this reason. This was coming from outside the perimeter. Someone out there had made a mistake, seeking a moment of comfort before the final approach. That mistake told Elena 3 things. They were closer than their earlier position suggested. They were experienced enough to have made it this far without being detected by sensors, and they were human enough to crave small comforts before facing danger. She could use that. Elena moved carefully back to the bunker, each step deliberate, testing the ground before committing her weight. The last thing she needed was to slip and make noise that would alert the enemy. Inside, she found Jessica in the communications room, headphones clamped over her ears, eyes closed in concentration. "Status?" Elena asked quietly. Jessica's eyes opened. "Radio is completely dead. The storm's playing hell with everything. I'm getting nothing but static on all frequencies." She paused. "Captain, even if we needed to call for backup, we're cut off. We're on our own." "We were always on our own," Elena said. "Can you get me thermal imaging from the perimeter cameras?" Jessica shook her head. "Already tried. The cameras are completely iced over. Every lens is covered. I'm getting nothing but white noise." "Motion sensors?" "Going crazy. The wind is triggering them every 30 seconds. I've had to mute the alarms because they were constant." So they were truly blind, operating on sound and instinct alone. Exactly the conditions the enemy wanted. Elena made a decision that would have gotten her court-martialed in peacetime but was absolutely necessary now. "I'm going outside. I need to read the terrain, understand how they'll approach." "Captain, I know, but we're fighting blind and they're not. I need to even those odds." Before Jessica could protest further, Elena left the bunker and stepped outside into the full fury of the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The wind tried to tear the door from her grasp. Snow stung her exposed face like needles, even through the balaclava she'd pulled on. But she needed this, needed to feel the storm the way the enemy was feeling it, to understand the conditions they were moving through. She walked slowly along the inside of the fence line, each step careful, testing the ground. Here, the snow had drifted high enough to create a natural ramp almost to the top of the fence. There, it was blown clear, revealing frozen ground underneath. She noted each variation, building a mental map of where approaches would be easiest, where someone could move quietly, where the terrain itself would slow them down. She found tracks, fresh ones, not yet fully obscured by the falling snow. Multiple sets, running parallel to the fence, moving from west to east. They were scouting the perimeter, looking for weak points, just as she'd predicted. Elena followed the tracks for 20 meters, moving as silently as possible. Then she stopped, crouching behind a concrete barrier. Something glinted in the snow ahead, a cigarette butt, still smoking slightly, heat melting the snow around it. She was right behind them now, maybe 5 minutes delayed. She keyed her radio, speaking in the barest whisper. "Northern fence, eastern section. They're here. Multiple hostiles, at least 6, moving along the perimeter looking for entry points. All stations, weapons ready, but hold fire. No one shoots until I give the command." This time there was a response, Marcus's voice tense but controlled. "Understood." That single word carried weight. He'd acknowledged her order without argument, without questioning. In this moment, faced with real danger, the discord between them had temporarily evaporated. They were soldiers doing a job. Elena moved back toward the bunker, but she didn't go inside. Instead, she positioned herself in the shadow of a concrete barrier that provided cover while giving her a clear view of the fence line. She settled in, rifle across her knees, breathing slowly to keep her heart rate down. The wind was a wall of sound, but underneath it she could hear them now. Careful footsteps crunching through snow, the soft jingle of equipment being readjusted, the whisper of fabric against fabric. They were disciplined, professional, but not perfect. No one was perfect in these conditions. A figure emerged from the white curtain, maybe 10 meters from her position. Then another. Then 3 more. They moved in a tactical formation, covering each other, scanning for threats. Well-trained, experienced. They stopped at a section of fence where a concrete pylon had developed a crack over the winter. The damage was purely cosmetic. Elena had checked it herself during her first week. but to someone examining from the outside, it might look like a structural weakness. The perfect place to attempt a breach. Elena watched as one of them produced cutting tools. They were going to come through right here, right where she was positioned. Perfect. She didn't move, didn't raise her rifle, didn't key her radio. She waited. The first section of fence fell away with a soft metallic whisper, barely audible over the wind. The lead figure stepped through the gap, weapons sweeping left and right, looking for opposition that wasn't there. Still, Elena waited. 2 more came through, then 3 more. They were all inside the perimeter now, clustered in a tight group near the breach, probably communicating with hand signals, confirming the entry was successful. That's when the second breach happened. The sound of cutting tools on chain link carrying even through the storm, coming from the eastern side of the compound where the service gate was located. Elena allowed herself a tight smile. A coordinated assault, exactly as she'd predicted. 2 breach points, forcing defenders to split their forces, creating confusion and chaos. Standard tactics, predictable tactics. She keyed her radio. All stations, they're through on both sides. Northern group has 6 confirmed. Eastern group unknown. Hold your positions. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. From inside the bunker, she heard someone curse, probably Daniel or one of the others, not understanding why she wasn't giving the order to fire. They were through the perimeter. They were inside the compound. Why weren't they stopping them? But Elena was counting. 6 through the northern fence. Sounds of movement at the eastern gate suggested at least 4 more there, possibly 5, 10 or 11 confirmed. Intelligence had said 15. Where were the others? She got her answer 30 seconds later when motion erupted from the ravine itself, the approach everyone had been watching, the obvious route that any attacking force would use. But this group wasn't trying to be subtle. They were running, making noise, deliberately drawing attention. The decoy force. Their strategy was clever and would have worked against most commanders. Breach the fence in 2 places while a third group makes a noisy approach from the expected direction, forcing defenders to choose between protecting the perimeter they'd already lost or stopping the obvious threat. In the confusion, the breach groups would hit the bunker from behind while defenders were focused forward. It was a good plan. Against a commander who defended the fence line, it would have been devastating. But Elena wasn't defending the fence line. She keyed her radio. All stations on my mark, activate infrared strobes only. No visible light. We're going to paint them for each other. Each member of her squad carried an infrared strobe, invisible to the naked eye, but clear as day through night vision goggles. In the whiteout conditions, it would be the only way to tell friend from foe. 3, 2, 1, mark. Through the observation post window, Jessica flipped a switch, and suddenly the compound transformed. Every friendly position lit up in the infrared spectrum. Each of Elena's squad members appeared as a pulsing beacon. The enemy forces, without their own IR markers, were just dark shapes moving through the snow. Elena raised her rifle, sighting through her night vision scope. The northern breach team came into sharp focus, 6 figures moving toward the bunker in a tactical wedge, weapons ready, thinking they were still undetected. She could see the eastern group now too, 5 of them, moving fast, trying to reach the bunker before anyone realized they were there. And in the ravine, the decoy group had stopped their noisy advance and were taking cover, waiting to see what would happen, ready to provide suppressing fire if needed. 16 total, 1 more than intelligence predicted, but close enough. Elena's finger rested lightly on the trigger. Around her, she knew her squad was doing the same, each person covering their assigned sector, waiting for the order that would turn the silent compound into chaos. But she didn't give it yet, because the most dangerous moment in any ambush is the instant before it's sprung. That's when you have perfect information, perfect positioning, perfect advantage. The moment you pull the trigger, everything becomes fluid. Things go wrong. People miss. The enemy reacts. So Elena waited 1 more second, watching the enemy advance, letting them commit fully to their assault, ensuring there was no retreat, no second guessing. The northern group was 15 meters from the bunker. The eastern group was 20 meters out. The decoy group in the ravine was starting to move forward again, probably thinking their comrades had reached the objective. Perfect. Elena spoke 1 word into her radio, fire. But before that trigger was pulled, before those 20 seconds that would define everything, there was a truth about Elena Voss that no one at Outpost 79 knew. She had not always been Captain Voss. She had not always been a leader who understood the weight of command decisions. And she had definitely not always been someone who could make the calculation she was about to make. 6 years ago, she'd been Lieutenant Voss at a different border post, Outpost 4-2 on the eastern sector. Younger, more idealistic, certain that superior firepower and aggressive tactics were the keys to survival. 4-2 had been hit by infiltrators on a night similar to this one. Cold, dark, visibility near zero. Elena had been in command of the response team. When the sensors went off, she'd done exactly what the manual said, established a perimeter, positioned her people, and waited for visual confirmation before engaging. But the enemy had been good. They'd moved like ghosts, and in the confusion of the storm it had been nearly impossible to tell hostile from friendly at any distance. Then Elena had seen movement. A figure running between structures, not responding to her challenges, moving in a way that suggested combat training. She'd made the call. Probable hostile, weapons free. Her squad had opened fire. The figure had gone down immediately, 3 rounds center mass. When they'd reached the body, Elena had found herself looking at Specialist Robert Hartman, a logistics clerk who'd been running to the armory for additional ammunition. He'd been wearing dark weather gear without proper identification. He'd panicked when challenged, run instead of responding properly. Elena's decision to shoot had been technically correct, by the book, justifiable given the circumstances. Specialist Robert Hartman had died anyway. He'd been 23 years old. He'd had a wife and a 6-month-old daughter he'd never met because he'd been deployed before the birth. He'd been 3 weeks from the end of his tour. The inquiry had cleared Elena of wrongdoing. The after-action report had noted reasonable response under conditions of uncertainty and imminent threat. Her record remained spotless. She'd been promoted 2 years later. But Elena had never forgotten the weight of Hartman's body when they'd carried him to the medical station. She'd never forgotten the sound his wife made when she received the notification. Elena had insisted on being present for that, though no one required it. She'd never forgotten holding that 6-month-old baby at the funeral, looking into eyes that would never see their father. That moment had changed everything for Elena. It had changed how she thought about command, about protocol, about the difference between being technically correct and being right. After 4-2, Elena had spent 3 years studying every border engagement she could access. She'd read after-action reports going back 20 years. She'd analyzed patterns, tactics, success rates. She'd talked to veterans, to commanders who'd kept people alive, and commanders who'd gotten them killed. What she'd learned was this: most casualties in border engagements didn't come from being outgunned. They came from confusion, from not knowing where the enemy was, from not knowing where your own people were, from making split-second decisions based on incomplete information. The best commanders weren't the ones with the most firepower. They were the ones who controlled chaos, who created clarity in confusion, who ensured that when triggers were pulled, everyone knew exactly what they were shooting at. That's why Elena had become obsessed with protocol. Not because she was rigid or inflexible, but because protocol created predictability, and predictability created clarity, and clarity kept people like Robert Hartman alive. After 4-2, she'd developed what she called her clarity doctrine, a way of approaching combat that prioritized identification and positioning over speed and aggression. The key was creating a battlefield where you always knew where your people were, where friend and foe were clearly marked, where every trigger pull was deliberate, not reactive. It required preparation. It required discipline. It required absolute adherence to positioning and protocol. That's what she'd been trying to implement at 7-9. That's why she'd been so strict about the guard rotations, about the covering positions, about every seemingly minor detail that Marcus and others had questioned. Because Elena knew something they didn't. When the shooting started, all those minor details would be the difference between a surgical operation and a slaughter. She'd tried to explain this during her 2nd week, during a training brief. She'd stood in front of the assembled squad and said, "The goal isn't to shoot faster than the enemy, it's to make every shot count, to create conditions where we have perfect information and they have none." Marcus had raised his hand. "With respect, Captain, Lieutenant Walsh's approach was more straightforward. Defend the perimeter, engage hostiles on site, superior firepower wins the day." And how many casualties did Outpost 7-9 take under Lieutenant Walsh? 3 injuries over 18 months, no fatalities. 3 injuries that could have been prevented with better clarity of battlefield conditions, Elena had countered. I've read those reports. In each case, someone got hurt because they were in the wrong position at the wrong time, exposed because the defensive scheme prioritized coverage over coordination. "We held the line," Marcus had said, his voice hardening. "You did, and I respect that, but we can do better. We can hold the line without bleeding for it." The squad had exchanged glances, some skeptical, some thoughtful, all uncertain whether this new approach would actually work or just get them killed. Now tonight, they were about to find out. Elena's method was simple in theory, but demanding in execution. She called it target sequencing, the practice of taking down enemies in a specific order to maximize disruption and minimize return fire. Most commanders taught their people to shoot center mass, eliminate the closest threat, work your way through targets by proximity. Logical, intuitive, often wrong. Elena had learned through her research that enemy assault teams had structure. They had leaders who called tactics, communications, people who coordinated movements, heavy weapons operators who provided suppression, and regular infantry who filled space. If you killed randomly, you might drop several enemies, but the unit would remain functional. The leader would adapt, the communicator would call for support, the heavy weapons would pin you down. But if you killed in sequence, leader first, then communicator, then heavy weapons, then infantry, you didn't just reduce enemy numbers, you destroyed their cohesion. A leaderless team couldn't coordinate, a team without communications couldn't adapt, a team without heavy weapons couldn't suppress your positions. They became targets instead of threats. The key was identifying the sequence fast and executing it perfectly. That required preparation, understanding of enemy tactics, and the ability to read a battlefield in real time. Elena had trained for this. She'd run scenarios hundreds of times. She'd studied how professional assault teams moved, how they positioned themselves, how they signaled and communicated. She could read an enemy formation the way a chess grandmaster reads a board, seeing not just where the pieces were, but what role each piece played and which removals would cause the system to collapse. Tonight's assault team was using a standard 3-element approach. 2 breach teams and a decoy. Textbook. The breach teams would have a leader, the person who moved first through the gap, who made decisions, who directed the others. They'd have someone carrying heavier equipment, probably breaching tools or additional ammunition, and they'd have regulars who followed orders. The decoy team would have similar structure, but with emphasis on creating noise and drawing attention. Elena had already identified the Northern Breach team's leader, the first person through the fence, the one whose body language suggested command rather than following. She'd marked him mentally, noted his position. When she gave the order to fire, he would be her first target. Not because he was closest or most dangerous in the moment, but because removing him would turn the other 5 from a coordinated unit into confused individuals. Then she'd take the person carrying the larger pack, probably their communications specialist or demolitions expert. Then work through the others in order of tactical value. If she executed the sequence correctly, the Northern Breach team would be neutralized in under 20 seconds with minimal risk to her own people. That was the theory. The reality was about to test whether 6 years of study and preparation could actually work in the chaos of real combat. Elena took a slow breath, steadying her aim. Through her night vision scope, she could see the Northern Breach team clearly now, 6 figures moving toward the bunker, 15 meters away and closing. She identified her sequence, leader at point, then the figure on the left with the larger pack, then the one providing rear security, then the 3 in the middle. 6 targets, 20 seconds or less. She exhaled slowly, finger tightening on the trigger, and spoke one word into her radio: fire. But before Elena had reached that moment, before the enemy had breached the fence, she'd spent the previous hour doing something that Marcus had thought was unnecessary and that the rest of the squad had found puzzling. She'd prepared kill zones. At 1900 hours, as the storm began its final approach, Elena had gathered her squad leaders, Marcus, Jessica, and Liam, for final defensive positioning. "I need sandbag barriers repositioned," she'd said, pointing to locations on her hand-drawn map. "Here, here, and here, angled 45 degrees to create overlapping fields of fire." Marcus had frowned. "Captain, those positions are already fortified. We've been using the current setup for over a year. The current setup creates individual firing positions. I need interlocking zones where every approach is covered by at least 2 positions, and where our people can see each other through infrared markers." "That's going to take an hour of work in increasingly bad conditions," Liam had pointed out. "I know, which is why we need to start now." They'd moved the barriers, though Marcus had made his skepticism clear through every shovelful of snow, every sandbag repositioned. The squad had grumbled, cold and tired, wondering why they were rearranging defenses that had worked fine for months. But Elena had been creating something specific: 3 overlapping zones of fire, each one designed so that if an enemy entered it, they'd be caught in crossfire from at least 2 positions. More importantly, her own people would never be in each other's line of fire. The geometry was calculated to ensure that even in chaos, even in whiteout conditions, no one would accidentally shoot a friendly. She'd also designated fallback positions, places where personnel could retreat if a zone was compromised. Each one marked with specific IR signals so everyone would know which position was which, even if they couldn't see clearly. Finally, she'd created what she called sound markers, empty tin cans on wire positioned along likely approach routes. They wouldn't stop anyone, but they'd rattle when disturbed, giving audible warning of movement even when visibility was 0. "This seems overcomplicated," Marcus had said as they finished. "We're fighting a border incursion, not planning a siege." "We're creating conditions where we can't lose," Elena had replied, "where every advantage is ours and every disadvantage is theirs." And if they don't attack the way you've predicted, then we adapt. But we adapt from a position of strength, not chaos. Now, as the enemy moved through her carefully prepared zones, Elena could see her preparation paying off. The northern breach team had entered through the fence at exactly the spot she'd predicted, the cracked pylon. They were now moving through the first kill zone, a funnel between two concrete barriers where their movement was channeled, where they had no cover, where 3 of her positions had clear lines of fire. The eastern team was doing the same, entering through the service gate area where Elena had deliberately left what appeared to be a weak approach, but was actually a carefully prepared fire sack. And the decoy team in the ravine was moving upslope into a zone where the terrain itself would slow them down, where snow drifts would force them into predictable paths, where they'd be exposed and vulnerable. Everything was proceeding according to plan. All stations, Elena whispered into her radio. Target sequence as briefed. Leaders first, communications second, heavy weapons third, then remaining hostiles. Fire on my command, maintain sequence, do not deviate. She'd briefed this sequence during the afternoon, had walked each squad member through the theory, had explained why sequence mattered more than speed. Some had understood immediately. Jessica, with her technical mind, had grasped the logic instantly. Sarah had nodded along, asking smart questions about identification. Others had been skeptical. Marcus had listened with barely concealed doubt, clearly thinking this was overly complex. But now, with targets in their scopes, with the reality of combat seconds away, everyone would find out if Elena's method worked. She positioned her rifle, acquiring her first target through the night vision scope. The northern breach team leader was clearly visible, IR negative against the IR positive markers of her squad. Northern team, you have 6 targets in Zone 1. Eastern team, you have 5 targets in Zone 2. Ravine team, stand by for 4 targets approaching Zone 3. Elena's voice was calm, methodical, calling out what each element could see from their positions. The entire compound was now a web of interlocking fields of fire, each position covering others, each squad member knowing exactly where their people were, exactly where the enemy was, exactly what their role in the sequence would be. This was the moment that would prove or disprove everything Elena believed about command, about preparation, about the difference between fighting and slaughtering. She took one final breath. All stations, execute on my count. 3, 2, 1, fire. The first shot was Elena's. The northern breach team leader dropped before he knew what hit him. Elena's round catching him center mass. He went down in the snow without a sound, weapon falling from his hands. In the same instant, Jessica fired from her position in the communications room, dropping the Eastern team's leader through a firing slit. Perfect shot, exactly as planned. 2 seconds. The Northern team's communications specialist, the one with the larger pack, turned toward where Elena's shot had come from, trying to identify the threat. Liam's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Sarah's follow-up shot finished it. 3 seconds. The Eastern team had frozen for a crucial half-second, their leader down, trying to process what was happening. Marcus, positioned in the bunker with a clear line to the service gate, fired 3 rapid shots. 2 enemies dropped. 5 seconds. Now the enemies started reacting, but they were reacting blind. They couldn't see their attackers, the IR strobes were invisible to them, and the defenders were positioned behind cover, muzzle flashes hidden or obscured. The Northern team's remaining 4 members tried to scatter, looking for cover that didn't exist in the kill zone Elena had prepared. Daniel, positioned on the opposite side, had clear shots at their backs. He fired twice. 1 enemy dropped. Another stumbled, hit but not down. 7 seconds. The Eastern team's remaining 3 were trying to retreat back toward the service gate, realizing they'd walked into a trap. But retreating meant crossing open ground, exposing themselves to multiple firing positions. Jessica shifted targets, tracking 1 enemy through her scope. Fired. Down. Marcus got another one. The third tried to go prone, seeking any cover, but Liam had the angle. 1 shot. Done. 10 seconds. The Northern team was down to 3 now. The wounded one trying to crawl toward the fence breach, 2 others who'd found minimal cover behind a supply crate that wasn't thick enough to stop rifle rounds. Elena shifted her aim, tracking the crawler. Single shot. Still. Private Tom Webster, positioned in the western bunker, had a clear line on the 2 behind the crate. He fired 3 times in rapid succession. Both enemies jerked and collapsed. 13 seconds. The decoy team in the ravine had heard the shooting and were advancing fast now, trying to support their teammates, not realizing both breach teams were already neutralized. They came over the ridgeline in a tight group. A fatal mistake. 4 targets, moving uphill through deep snow, clustered together. Elena keyed her radio. Ravine team, all yours. Corporal Jake Morrison and Private Rachel Chen had been waiting for this moment, positioned with clear sight lines down the slope. They fired together, methodically, working from left to right across the enemy formation. First enemy down. Second enemy tried to dive for cover, but the snowdrift collapsed under him. He floundered. Rachel's shot found him. Third and fourth enemies finally realized they were in a shooting gallery and tried to retreat back down the slope. But downhill was just as exposed as uphill. Jake fired. Third enemy dropped. The fourth managed to scramble behind a boulder, temporarily safe. But he was alone now, isolated, his entire team dead or dying around him. 19 seconds. Elena scanned the battlefield through her scope, counting bodies, checking for movement. Northern team, 6 down. Eastern team, 5 down. Ravine team, 3 down, 1 hiding. 15 confirmed neutralized, 1 remaining. She keyed her radio. Cease fire. 1 hostile remaining behind the boulder at the ravine entrance. Corporal Morrison, do you have visual? Negative, Captain. He's fully covered from my angle. Can he move from that position without exposing himself? Not in any direction, ma'am. He's pinned. 20 seconds had elapsed since Elena had given the order to fire. 15 enemies had been eliminated. 0 casualties on her side, 0 friendly fire incidents. The compound fell silent except for the wind, which continued to howl as if nothing had happened. Elena stood slowly from her position, rifle still ready, eyes still scanning. Around the compound, her squad members were doing the same, emerging from their carefully prepared positions, weapons trained on the killing zones they'd created. All stations, maintain positions. Do not approach the bodies. That last hostile is pinned but armed. Elena's voice was steady, showing none of the adrenaline she was feeling. Corporal Morrison, keep that boulder covered. If he moves, you're authorized to engage. Understood, Captain. Elena keyed to a different frequency, one reserved for situations exactly like this. Hostile behind the boulder near ravine entrance. You are surrounded. Your team is down. You have 1 chance to surrender. Throw your weapon over the boulder where we can see it and come out with your hands visible. You have 30 seconds to comply. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind howled. Snow continued to fall. The bodies of 15 enemies lay scattered across Elena's carefully prepared kill zones. Then a rifle came flying over the boulder, landing in the snow, followed by a pistol. Then a figure stood up slowly, hands raised high, facing toward the compound. Walk forward slowly, Elena commanded. Stop when I tell you. Make any sudden movement and you will be shot. The figure walked forward, stumbling slightly in the deep snow, hands never lowering. When he reached the fence line, Elena called out, "Stop! Face down in the snow, hands behind your head." The enemy complied. Corporal Chang, Corporal Rains, secure the prisoner. Everyone else, maintain positions until we've confirmed all hostiles are down and cleared the perimeter. Liam and Jessica moved cautiously from their positions, approaching the prone figure with weapons ready. Within minutes, the enemy was secured, searched, and being escorted to the holding cell in the bunker's basement. Only then did Elena allow herself to breathe normally. Only then did she key the radio for a full situation report. All stations, final status. One by one, her personnel reported in. No injuries, no casualties. All positions secure. Ammunition expended, minimal. Enemy neutralized, complete. It had been a perfect execution of a prepared defense. Every element had worked exactly as planned. The kill zones, the IR strobes, the target sequencing, the interlocking fields of fire, all of it had come together in 20 seconds of surgical precision. Marcus's voice came over the radio, and for the first time since Elena had arrived at 7-9, there was something new in his tone, something that might have been respect. Captain, Northern Sector secure, that was exceptional work. Elena allowed herself a slight smile. Thank you, Sergeant. All personnel, excellent execution. You did everything I asked and did it perfectly. That's why we're all standing and they're not. The immediate danger passed, but the compound remained at high alert for another hour. Bodies had to be checked, the perimeter had to be swept for additional threats, and the prisoner had to be secured and initially interrogated. Elena moved through these tasks with methodical efficiency, but she was watching her squad members carefully, seeing how they processed what had just happened. Private Daniel Ortega stood at his position, staring at the 2 bodies he'd dropped. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd been in firefights before, brief exchanges of fire across the border, hurried shots at distant targets, but he'd never seen the results this clearly, never watched people fall from his own bullets. Elena approached quietly. "First time?" she asked, her voice gentle. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. "It doesn't get easier," Elena said. "Shouldn't get easier. The day you stop feeling this is the day you need to find a different job." She paused. "You did well tonight. Your shots were clean, your discipline was perfect. You saved lives, ours, by taking theirs. That matters." "I was so scared," Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "When they came through the fence, I thought we were all going to die." "So did I for a moment," Elena said honestly. "But fear is just information. It tells you the stakes are real. What matters is what you do with that fear. You did exactly what you were trained to do, exactly what I needed you to do. That's courage. Daniel nodded, still processing. Elena gave his shoulder a brief squeeze and moved on. Sarah Mitchell was methodically checking her weapon, face pale but composed. She'd taken down 3 targets in the eastern zone, her shots precise despite the pressure. "You all right, Private?" Elena asked. Sarah looked up, meeting Elena's eyes. "I reported Sergeant Reed for missing his position. I thought maybe I was making a problem where there wasn't one. But tonight, if we hadn't all been exactly where we were supposed to be, we'd be dead," Elena finished. "You did the right thing. Protocol isn't about being rigid. It's about making sure everyone lives to see morning." "I understand that now," Sarah said quietly. Jessica was in the communications room, hands still shaking from adrenaline as she tried to restore contact with Sector Command. The radio had started clearing up as the worst of the storm passed, and she was determined to report their status. "Any luck?" Elena asked. "Getting something. Still a lot of static, but..." Jessica adjusted the frequency, and suddenly a voice broke through. 7-9, this is Sector Command. 7-9, do you copy?" Jessica grabbed the handset. "Sector Command, this is 7-9. We copy. Be advised, we engaged hostile force approximately 1 hour ago. 15 enemy combatants neutralized, 1 prisoner secured, 0 friendly casualties." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, 7-9, say again your last. "Did you say 15 enemy neutralized with 0 friendly casualties?" "Affirmative, Command. 15 down, 1 captured, 0 friendly wounded." "Stand by, 7-9. Another pause, longer this time. Elena could imagine the reaction at command, checking to make sure they'd heard correctly, probably getting a senior officer to verify. Then a different voice came on the line, one Elena recognized, Colonel Brennan. "Captain Voss, this is Brennan. Confirm your situation report." "Confirmed, sir. Hostile force of 16 attempted coordinated assault using storm as cover. We engaged using prepared defensive positions and eliminated 15 hostiles in approximately 20 seconds. 1 surviving hostile surrendered and is now secured. All 7-9 personnel accounted for with no injuries." 20 seconds, Brennan repeated, disbelief clear in his voice. "Captain, we had intelligence suggesting this was a professional military unit, former special operations. You're telling me you neutralized them in 20 seconds? "Yes, sir. We used target sequencing and prepared kill zones. They walked into a situation where we had complete information advantage and they had none. It wasn't a fair fight." "No," Brennan said slowly. "It sounds like it wasn't. Well done, Captain. Extremely well done. We're dispatching a recovery team to your location. They should arrive by dawn once the storm clears. In the meantime, maintain security posture and prepare the prisoner for transport." "Understood, sir. And Captain, I owe you an apology. I had doubts about this assignment. Clearly, those doubts were misplaced." "Thank you, sir. 7-9 out." Jessica set down the handset and looked at Elena with something approaching awe. 20 seconds. I knew we did it fast, but hearing it said back like that... "It was fast because everyone did their job perfectly," Elena said. "You included. Your IR strobe coordination gave us the visibility we needed." After Jessica, Elena found Liam checking the perimeter, methodically walking the fence line with a flashlight. He'd been thorough before. Now he was exhaustive, checking every meter, every post, every wire. "Corporal Chang," Liam turned, straightening. "Captain, just making sure we didn't miss anything." "Walk with me." They moved along the fence together, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The storm was finally breaking up, patches of stars visible through the clouds. "You hesitated," Elena said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "When I gave the order to fire, half a second, maybe less, but you hesitated." Liam was quiet for a moment. "I did. I was thinking about what Marcus said about you being untested. I was wondering if you really knew what you were doing, if following your plan would get us killed." He paused. "I'm sorry, Captain. You deserved better." "You followed the order," Elena pointed out. "You made your shot exactly when you needed to. That's what matters. But the doubt is human. I'd be more concerned if you'd followed blindly without ever questioning. The doubt existed because you care about staying alive, about keeping your squad mates alive. That's good. What makes you a good soldier is that you followed the order despite the doubt." Elena stopped, turning to face him. "You want to know a secret? I had doubts too. Right up until the moment I gave that fire command, I was wondering if my plan would work or if I'd just sentenced everyone to death." "Really?" "Really, but I'd done the preparation. I'd studied the tactics. I'd created the best possible conditions for success. At some point, you have to trust the work you've put in and execute. That's what leadership is, not having all the answers, but making the best possible decisions with the information you have." They walked in silence for a while, checking the fence until Liam spoke again. Sergeant Reed wants to talk to you. He's in the bunker. I think he's been thinking about a lot of things. Thanks for the heads up. Elena found Marcus in the bunker's main room, sitting at the briefing table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He stood when she entered. Captain, Sergeant. Marcus gestured to a chair. Could we talk, off the record? Elena sat. Go ahead. Marcus took a breath, and she could see him wrestling with something. Finally, he said, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I questioned your appointment. I questioned your methods. I deliberately created situations to test whether you really knew what you were doing, and in doing so, I undermined unit cohesion and put people at risk. That was wrong. I was wrong. Why did you do it? Elena asked, genuinely curious. Because I was passed over for promotion twice. Because I thought I knew this post better than anyone, and that knowledge should count for something. Because... He paused, looking uncomfortable. Because a young officer got handed a command I thought should have been mine, at least temporarily, and I resented it. That resentment made me assume you didn't deserve the position. I see. But tonight proved something I should have recognized earlier. You didn't get this command through favoritism or connections. You got it because you're exceptional at what you do. The way you read that attack, the way you prepared the defenses, the target sequencing concept. I've been doing this for 17 years, and I've never seen anything that effective. Marcus met her eyes. You're a better tactical commander than I'll ever be. That's hard to admit, but it's true. Elena was quiet for a moment, letting his words settle. Can I tell you something? The reason my appointment went through so fast wasn't because I had connections. It was because General Morrison actively opposed me. I went through training with his daughter, yes, but I also filed a report that ended her military career. He's been blocking my advancement ever since. The only reason I got 7-9 is because the commission overruled him. Marcus stared at her. So the favoritism everyone whispered about was exactly backward. I got this post despite powerful opposition, not because of powerful friends. Elena leaned forward. But here's what matters, Marcus. Even if I had gotten it through connections, even if I'd been someone's friend or relative, the only thing that would really matter is whether I could do the job. Tonight answered that question, for both of us. It did, Marcus agreed. And for what it's worth, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about why your appointment went through so fast. They deserve to know they're serving under someone who earned this position. I appreciate that. But honestly, I don't need you to defend me. What I need is for you to work with me, not against me. You have 17 years of experience I don't have. You know these people, this post, these conditions better than I do. I meant it when I said I need your knowledge. I just also need your trust. You have it now, Marcus said firmly, both the knowledge and the trust. No more tests, no more second guessing. You give an order, I execute it. That's the deal. Good, because we're going to get more attacks. This was just the first. And next time I'm going to need everything you know about border tactics to supplement what I bring to the table. Marcus nodded. Then you'll have it. All of it. They shook hands, and Elena could feel something fundamental shift. The resistance that had defined the past 2 weeks was gone, replaced by something that might actually become a functional command relationship. As Marcus left, Elena sat alone in the bunker for a few minutes, processing everything that had happened. 20 seconds, 15 enemies down, 0 friendly casualties. She'd proven her tactical method worked. She'd proven the target sequencing concept was sound. She'd proven that preparation and discipline could overcome superior enemy numbers and training. But more than that, she'd finally proven, to herself as much as to her squad, that she deserved to be here. That the rank on her collar wasn't a gift or a favor, but a reflection of genuine capability. The door opened again, and Private Tom Webster stuck his head in. Captain, the prisoner is asking to speak with you. Says he has information about additional attacks. Elena stood, fatigue suddenly hitting her. It had been a long night, and it wasn't over yet. Take me to him. The holding cell was a small room in the bunker's basement, reinforced concrete with a heavy metal door. The prisoner sat on a bench, hands secured, face bruised from where he'd hit the ground during his surrender. Elena entered with Liam and Marcus flanking her. Standard procedure, never interrogate alone. The prisoner looked up, and Elena was surprised by what she saw. He was young, maybe 30, with the lean build and alert eyes of someone who'd been professional military. But there was something else, a kind of resigned respect. You're the commander, he said, not a question. I am Captain Elena Voss. Captain? He nodded slightly, as much of a salute as his restrained position allowed. That was impressive, what you did out there. I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen a defensive operation that clean. Who are you? Elena asked, pulling up a chair. Nikolai Petrov, former special operations, now private contractor. My team was hired to test your border defenses, report back on weaknesses. We were told this outpost was undermanned and poorly led. Easy target. Your intelligence was bad. Clearly. He smiled without humor. We were supposed to breach, document your response procedures, extract without engagement if possible. But your preparation, you weren't defending a perimeter. You were setting a trap. Why are you telling me this? Because my team is dead, and I'm trying to decide if cooperation might keep me alive. Nikolai leaned forward. But also because I respect competence. What you did tonight was professional-grade work. Your target sequencing was textbook, leader, comms, heavy weapons, then infantry. You read our formation perfectly. Elena felt a chill. How do you know our target sequence? Because that's how we were trained. That's how the best units in the world engage superior forces. You cut the head off the snake, then kill the body. He paused. Where did you learn that? That's not standard border patrol doctrine. I read, Elena said simply. A lot. After-action reports, tactical manuals, classified studies. I've spent years studying how to win asymmetric engagements. It shows. Nikolai settled back. All right, Captain, I'll tell you what I know. There are 3 more teams like mine operating in this sector. Different targets, different timelines, but the same mission. Probe the defenses, find weaknesses, prepare for something bigger. How much bigger? Don't know specifics above my pay grade, but the contractor who hired us is working for someone with resources and motivation. This isn't random, this is planned. Elena exchanged glances with Marcus. This confirmed what intelligence had been suggesting. The recent border activity wasn't isolated incidents, but part of a coordinated campaign. When are the other teams scheduled to move? Elena asked. Next 2 weeks. Different posts along the border. But after what happened here tonight, after your people report what you did. Nikolai smiled grimly. They're going to reassess. You just raised the difficulty level for every operation in this sector. Good. There's something else you should know, Nikolai said. My team leader, the one you shot first, very impressive shot by the way, he had a contingency protocol. If we didn't check in by 0600 hours, our handler was supposed to assume we'd been compromised and abort the follow-up operations. Elena checked her watch. It was 0430. They had 90 minutes until that check-in deadline. What happens if the handler aborts? Depends. Maybe they pull back, reassess, try again later with better intel, or maybe they decide to send a bigger hammer to break whatever they couldn't finesse. Define bigger hammer. Could be anything from a reinforced assault team to indirect fire to aerial reconnaissance. I honestly don't know. But people who hire teams like mine usually have contingency plans for when the subtle approach fails. Elena stood. Thank you for your cooperation. You'll be transferred to Sector Command when they arrive. What happens after that is above my authority. I understand. Nikolai looked at her curiously. Can I ask you something, Captain? Go ahead. The way your people responded tonight, that was perfect coordination, perfect trust. But when I was watching during our approach, I could tell there was tension in your unit. People questioning orders, hesitation in the movements. What changed? Elena smiled slightly. They watched me work. Sometimes that's all it takes. The storm broke completely around 0500 hours. The wind died down, the snow stopped falling, and the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Elena stood outside the bunker, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. Behind her, she could hear her squad moving through post-combat procedures, cleaning weapons, restocking ammunition, documenting the engagement for the official report. Footsteps crunched in the snow. Jessica appeared beside her holding 2 cups of coffee. She offered one to Elena. Figured you could use this. Thanks. Elena wrapped her cold hands around the warm cup, savoring the heat. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light spread across the landscape. The bodies of the 15 enemies had been covered with tarps, awaiting the recovery team. The prisoner was secured. The outpost was returning to normal, or as normal as it could be after a night like that. Can I ask you something, Captain? Jessica said finally. Of course. How did you stay so calm? When they were coming through the fence, when we were seconds away from contact, you never wavered. You never hesitated. How? Elena considered the question. Because I'd already made all the important decisions hours before. Where to position people, how to create kill zones, what sequence to use for target elimination. By the time the shooting started, there was nothing left to decide, just execution. But what if your plan had been wrong? What if they'd come from a different direction or used different tactics? Then I'd have adapted. But I'd have adapted from a position of strength, prepared defenses, clear communication, coordinated fields of fire. Even if they'd surprised us, we'd have had better odds than if we'd been defending without preparation. Jessica nodded slowly, processing this. Lieutenant Walsh used to say that battle plans don't survive contact with the enemy, that you can't prepare for everything. He was half right. You can't prepare for every specific scenario, but you can prepare a framework that works regardless of specifics. That's what we did tonight. We didn't prepare for that exact attack. We prepared a system that would work against any attack. It's brilliant, Jessica said. Simple, but brilliant. It's what kept Robert Hartman from dying, Elena said quietly. Who? Elena told her. About 4-2, about the storm, about the split-second decision that had been technically correct but humanly wrong, about the inquiry that cleared her and the guilt that hadn't. That's why I care so much about protocol, Elena finished. Not because I'm rigid or inflexible, but because protocol creates clarity, and clarity prevents the kind of mistake I made 6 years ago. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. I wish you'd told us this earlier. When people were questioning whether you deserved this command, if they'd known what actually drove your decisions, would it have mattered, or would they have just seen it as another story, another claim without proof? Elena shook her head. No, it's better this way. They needed to see it work. They needed to experience the results before they'd believe the method. And now? Now they know, not because I told them, but because they lived through it. That's the kind of belief that actually matters. The sun was fully up now, brilliant light reflecting off the white snow. In the distance, Elena could see movement, the recovery team from Sector Command making their way up the mountain road. Marcus appeared in the bunker doorway. Captain, recovery team is about 10 minutes out. Also, several squad members would like a word if you have time. Of course. Inside, Elena found most of her squad gathered in the common area. They stood when she entered, and she was surprised to see something approaching formality in their postures. Daniel spoke first. Captain, we wanted to say something as a group. We owe you an apology. These past 2 weeks we doubted you. We questioned your methods. Some of us, he glanced at the others, actively worked against you. We were wrong. What you did tonight, what you showed us, it wasn't just tactics, it was leadership. Real leadership, the kind that keeps people alive. Sarah stepped forward. We should have trusted you from the beginning, should have recognized that someone doesn't get a command like this without being exceptional at their job. But we let rumors and resentment cloud our judgment. And for that, we're sorry, Liam added. You deserved better from us. You deserved trust, respect, and support. Instead, you got suspicion and resistance. Elena looked at the assembled faces, young and old, experienced and green, all of them watching her with something she hadn't seen before, not just respect, understanding. I appreciate that, she said. But understand something. Your doubt wasn't unreasonable. I was new. I was untested. I was asking you to follow procedures you didn't understand, to trust methods you'd never seen work. Doubt under those circumstances is rational. But we should have given you a chance, Marcus said from the doorway. Should have followed your lead without resistance, at least until we'd seen what you could do. Instead, we made your job harder when you were trying to keep us alive. You did make it harder, Elena agreed. But you also made me better. Every question forced me to think through my reasoning. Every pushback made me examine whether I was right. And when the moment came, you all executed perfectly despite your doubts. That takes courage. She moved to stand in the center of the room, looking at each person in turn. Here's what I want you to understand. Tonight worked because of preparation, yes, but also because when it mattered, when lives were on the line, you all did exactly what needed to be done. You followed orders precisely. You maintained discipline under fire. You trusted the plan even though you'd questioned it hours before. That's what makes the difference between a mob and a military unit. Not blind obedience, but the ability to execute even when you're uncertain. So you're not mad? Daniel asked, sounding relieved. I'm not mad. I'm proud. You all performed exceptionally tonight, and now we're going to build on that. We're going to take the lessons from this engagement and prepare for the next one, because according to our prisoner, this is just the beginning. The mood in the room shifted from apologetic to focused. What's the threat assessment? Marcus asked, stepping fully into the room. All business now. 3 more teams like the one we faced, operating in our sector. Different targets, different timelines, and possibly larger scale operations if the subtle approach continues to fail. So we need to be ready for escalation. Exactly. Which means we use the next few days to refine our procedures, improve our preparations, and document our methods so they can be shared with other outposts. Elena pulled out her tactical notebook. Marcus, I want you to lead that documentation. You've got the experience to explain things in terms other border veterans will understand. Marcus nodded, looking pleased to be given meaningful responsibility. Jessica, we need better communication redundancy. If the storm had been worse, we could have lost all contact. Work on alternate systems. Yes, ma'am. Liam, I want a complete perimeter audit. Every weak point identified and addressed. Sarah, inventory management. Make sure we're stocked for sustained operations. Orders given, responsibilities assigned. The squad moved into action with purpose and coordination that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. As they dispersed to their tasks, Private Rachel Chen approached Elena. She'd been one of the quieter squad members, rarely speaking up, but she'd been deadly effective during the engagement. "Captain, I just wanted to say, before tonight, I wasn't sure about serving under you, but you did something I've never seen before. You made us better than we thought we could be. You showed us what's possible when someone actually knows what they're doing." She hesitated. "I'm proud to serve in your command, genuinely proud." "Thank you, Rachel, that means a lot." After Rachel left, Elena found herself alone again. She walked through the bunker, noting the change in atmosphere. The tension was gone, replaced by purpose. The doubt had evaporated, replaced by confidence. The resentment had transformed into respect. She'd proven herself not through speeches or credentials, but through results. Through preparation meeting opportunity, through method tested in chaos, through leadership demonstrated under fire. The whispers about favoritism had been silenced not by explanations or denials, but by 20 seconds of perfect execution that proved beyond any doubt that she belonged in this position. The recovery team arrived at 0615, led by Major William Bradford from Sector Command. He stepped out of the transport vehicle and looked around the compound, taking in the covered bodies, the defensive positions, the calm efficiency of the squad going about their duties. Elena met him at the bunker entrance, saluting. "Major Bradford." "Captain Voss." He returned the salute, then extended his hand. "Colonel Brennan briefed me on your situation report. Frankly, I had to read it 3 times to believe it. 16 hostiles engaged, 15 neutralized, 1 captured, 0 friendly casualties. That's not a firefight, that's a masterclass." "We had advantages, sir. Preparation, positioning, and a coordinated enemy approach that played into our defensive scheme." "Even so," Bradford shook his head. "I've seen combat engagements with similar force ratios go very differently. What you did here will be studied, Captain. Mark my words, this is going to become a case study in defensive operations." They walked the perimeter together, Bradford asking detailed questions about positioning, timing, decision-making. Elena answered thoroughly, explaining her reasoning at each step, demonstrating the kill zones she'd prepared. "The target sequencing concept is particularly interesting," Bradford said. "That's not standard doctrine. It's adapted from several classified studies on asymmetric warfare. The principle is simple. Disrupt enemy coordination faster than they can adapt. Simple in theory, complex in execution." Bradford stopped at the northern fence breach, looking at the cut section. "You knew they'd come through here?" "I knew this was the most logical entry point given terrain and visual cover. I prepared accordingly." "And if they'd chosen differently?" "The same principles would apply, just in different locations. The key isn't predicting exact enemy actions, it's creating conditions where their options are all bad." Bradford smiled. "You've thought about this deeply." "I've had reason to, sir." They returned to the bunker where the prisoner was being prepared for transport. Bradford took a moment to interview Nikolai, then returned to Elena. "He confirmed everything you reported, also provided some intelligence about contractor networks that our people will find very valuable." Bradford pulled out a sealed envelope. "Colonel Brennan asked me to deliver this personally." Elena opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, official letterhead, brief text. "Captain Voss, exceptional work at Outpost 79. Your tactical innovation and leadership under fire have exceeded all expectations. I'm recommending you for commendation and requesting your input on updated defensive protocols for all border outposts in this sector. I was wrong about my initial doubts. You've proven yourself one of the most capable field commanders I've had the privilege to work with. Respectfully to Colonel James Brennan." Elena folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "He doesn't give praise lightly," Bradford observed. "I know, sir. There's something else." Bradford's expression turned serious. "General Morrison heard about this engagement. He's filed a formal complaint alleging that your methods were unnecessarily aggressive, that the enemy should have been given more opportunity to surrender, that the high casualty count reflects poor judgment." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "I see. Don't worry too much. The complaint won't go anywhere. Your actions were completely justified and the results speak for themselves. But Morrison is still trying to damage your career even after this success." Bradford paused. "The colonel wanted you to know so you're not blindsided if it comes up." "I appreciate the warning, sir. For what it's worth, Captain, anyone who looks at the evidence can see Morrison's complaint is motivated by personal bias, not legitimate concern. You saved lives last night, your people's lives. That's what matters." After Bradford and his team departed with the prisoner and the bodies, Elena gathered her squad one final time. "I want to say something before we transition back to normal operations. What we did last night was exceptional. Perfect execution, 0 mistakes, complete mission success. That's rare. That's the kind of performance that happens maybe once in a career, if you're lucky. She looked around at the faces watching her. But here's what I need you to understand. We can't rely on perfect conditions every time. The next attack might be bigger, better coordinated, less predictable. We might not have storm cover to mask our preparations. We might not get IR strobes or night vision. We might face situations where everything we did last night doesn't work. So what do? Daniel asked. We keep preparing, we keep training, we keep refining our methods. We don't assume that one success means we've figured everything out. We stay humble, stay vigilant, and stay ready to adapt. Elena paused. Last night proved that preparation and discipline can overcome superior enemy forces. But it also proved that you can't skip the preparation. You can't take shortcuts on the discipline. The only reason we survived is because we did the work beforehand. Marcus stepped forward. Captain, speaking for everyone here, we're ready to do that work. We understand now what you were building. We won't question it again. Good. Because the next few weeks are going to be intense. We need to fortify this position, train on new scenarios, prepare for escalation. And we need to do it while maintaining operational security and regular duties. We're with you, Captain, Jessica said. All of us. Elena nodded, feeling something settle into place. Not just command authority. Anyone could have that. But trust. Real, earned, tested under fire trust. Then let's get to work. The sun was high now, burning off the last of the storm clouds, turning the snow-covered mountains into brilliant white peaks against a blue sky. The compound bustled with activity, repairs being made, reports being written, lessons being documented. Elena stood at the observation window one last time, looking out at the terrain where 15 enemies had died and her command had been forged in fire. She thought about the whispers that had followed her for 2 weeks. She got the position through connections. She doesn't have experience, she'll get us killed. Those whispers were gone now, replaced by a different kind of talk. Did you see how she read their approach? Did you see the kill zones she prepared? Did you see how calm she was? She thought about General Morrison's complaint, about the fact that even success wouldn't stop some people from trying to tear her down. That was fine. Let them file their complaints. Let them question her methods. The people who mattered, the people whose lives depended on her decisions, those people knew the truth now. She thought about Robert Hartman, about the mistakes she'd made 6 years ago that had driven everything since. She couldn't bring him back, couldn't undo that moment of confusion that had cost him his life. But she'd built something from that tragedy, a system, a method, a way of operating that prevented others from dying the same way. 20 seconds, 15 enemies, 0 friendly casualties. That was Robert Hartman's legacy, even if no one except Elena knew it. Behind her, the door opened. Marcus entered, carrying a tactical notebook. Captain, I've started the documentation you requested. Want to review it? Let me see. They sat together at the briefing table, Commander and Senior NCO, working through the details of what they'd learned, how to translate it into procedures others could use, how to turn one perfect engagement into a replicable system. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying snow in swirling patterns across the compound. Another storm was building on the horizon, another test coming. But for the first time since arriving at Outpost 79, Elena felt ready. Not because she was certain of success, uncertainty was part of combat, part of command, part of life, but because she had a team that trusted her, methods that worked, and the confidence that came from preparation meeting opportunity. They said she'd led by favoritism. 20 seconds had proven otherwise, and when the next attack came, and it would come, they'd be ready. Together.